All right, boys and girls, we are back with another edition of The Big Ben Show. I'm your host, Ben Domenech. You can follow me on X at BDomenech. Follow the show on X and Instagram at Big Ben Show Fox. And it is my honor to welcome you to the greatest country for hockey in the world, the United States of America.
The first gold medal for the United States in 46 years, and you delivered it. Can you just describe the emotions of this moment right now?
This is all about our country right now. I love the USA. I love my teammates. It's unbelievable. The USA Hockey Brotherhood is so strong, and we had so much support from ex-players. I'm so proud to be American today.
This was such an incredible game to grind out. I mean, you're bleeding right through it just looking at you right now. Can you just talk about how difficult this gold medal was to win?
Unbelievable game by Hellebuyck. He was our best player tonight by a mile. Unbelievable game. Unreal game by our team. That's just a ballsy, gutsy win. That's American hockey right there. That's a great Canadian team, but we're USA. We're so proud to be Americans. Tonight was all for the country.
It was truly a great team performance from Team USA. You say team, but of course, sometimes there's a goalie who just stands on his head, and that's what the Canadians, for their sins, ran into in a situation where they had such a dominant performance in the second and third period. The Canadians ultimately came up short. They just let the Americans have too much time, and that's something that I think is a testament to the way that this team comes together. One of the reasons that I love hockey so much, even growing up in the South, not experiencing it myself personally, is that it is such a throwback to a time before stars, before you had the dominance of star players in so many different sports. It's a bunch of, fist fighting Slavs and Scots-Irish, people from coal mining towns and union towns, people who, if they, just inherited their dad's job at the local factory, would end up, living their lives out and close to home and dying and leaving a plaque at their local. The same place that was probably open for their fathers and brothers to be watching it at home, far afield from where they could cheer on and call for Freebird on the jukebox at the end of the game. Look, this is a throwback for a reason. It's because these guys don't seem like the kind of highly paid NHL athletes that they are, and that's a good thing. It's something that exists out of time, and it's something that we should be encouraged by. And the pride that they took in being Americans and winning for America is incredible. I mean, the thing that is so lacking, I think, so much today, and in such contrast to the likes of Eileen Gu, who, let's see what she buys with that silver, maybe a field. It's the truth is that when you look at these guys, these rough and tumble guys, the guys just shaking off the loss of a couple of teeth, totally worth it, by the way, in exchange for the gold. The thing that you know about it is that they would have done it for free, and they would have done it for their team.
It's hockey players.
Why?
Take losing so personally. They don't just accept blame for a loss, they claim it. They take that burden off of their teammates. I fucked up. I cost us the game. I need to be better. But when they win, it's never personal. They never take credit. They never say I. They share it. In other sports, it's me, but in hockey, it's we. It's a team.
And that team came together in such an incredible way, in part motivated by the absence of one Johnny Gaudreau, whose jersey they kept with them in the locker room and then carried out onto the ice, even welcoming his kids onto the ice in a moment that, even if they don't remember it, they can look back on and appreciate. His widow was there, of course, and it was an incredibly emotional and dramatic scene for them in that moment.
And I know the guys are trying to make him a part of it. His jersey is hanging in the locker room. What does that mean to you and the kids?
Yeah, we saw it on TV, so I told Noah these are Daddy's friends, and we saw his picture and number 13 she knows, so she knows we're at a special game. And I said if Daddy was here, he'd probably be here too. So, it's really nice that they continue to keep him a part of it. It means the world to us as a family. It's heavy being here, but it's one of those things where you can't not come out, as hard as it is sometimes, but I really thank all of them for bringing his jersey, hanging it up, talking about him. That's all I can ask for right now.
Hockey is a team thing, but it's also a family thing. You saw that with the different brothers who were participating in this year's team and in all the connections they had to past year's team and even across to the women's team. The Hughes family now has 3 gold medals from this, given that their mom was one of the coaches for the women's team, which, by the way, ended in its own dramatic fashion with a deke that was right out of something from Sega Genesis or the like. I am always impressed by the way that families come together around team sports like this. And it's something that I think is in this era when there's so much of a commodification of these things and people are just scrambling to make money from all of this. It's a throwback again to the types of things that bring families and communities together around the best players that emerge from their hearth and home.
2, 3.
Oh, 2 minutes to Matthew Tkachuk for pushing down your brother. Oh, Matthew, that's too rough. Fighting? And Matthew has 2 minutes for fighting. You guys are both off. So Brandon.
No, I'm not fighting, I was checking.
Oh, you were checking. Okay.
And then just a couple of decades later.
And this Four Nations face-off matchup is underway, and the gloves are off. Matthew Tkachuk and Brandon Hagel. Hagel from Tampa Bay, Tkachuk from Florida. Did not see this coming.
He wasn't just checking there. And then, of course, there's the international consequences of this. America being dominant when it comes to both the women's and the men's hockey is something that has to be borne as an incredible insult for the Canadians who are left to resort to the moniker that silver shines just as bright, and they can cry their tears into their little stuffed animals that they got. But the truth is that this is good. This is a good way for countries to fight and squabble and hate each other and want to beat each other up at whenever the next Four Nations exhibition takes place. But I think that that's a healthy thing. I think it's a very healthy thing. And I think that it's inspirational for a next generation of Americans who saw what happened here in Milan and can take the lesson from it, that they too can hope for fighting for Olympic gold for their country proudly one day. In 2019, Jack Hughes was asked to write a letter to his future self. 7 years later, this portion sticks out. Your brothers made you who you are on and off the ice. I hope they'll be able to say you did the same for them and that they had great NHL careers too. Maybe you even suited up with them a couple of times. Maybe we all represented the United States at the Olympics or World Championships. Maybe we won a gold medal or gold medals together. What an honor that would be. And so I think that we should appreciate that honor. We should treat the Canadians with class and respect. Their national sport taken away from them in such a way that has got to feel very painful for them, particularly when there were people watching and cheering and crying over this game who probably had never watched a hockey game before in their life. So we should treat them with the respect that they deserve.
Ladies and gentlemen, please rise and remove your hats for a special rendition of the Canadian national anthem, performed by 10-year-old Dougie Bibeau, who is learning to play the recorder.
C'est une interprétation toute spéciale de notre hymne.
See, Canada, there's nothing that you possess that we cannot take away. I'm Ben Domenech. You're listening to The Big Ben Show. We'll be back with more right after this. Happy to be joined again on the Big Ben Show by the great Lucas Tomlinson. You can follow him on X at Lucas Fox News. Lucas, I wanted to talk to you about all the different things that are going on in the world today. I do want to preface this by saying we're having this conversation prior to the State of the Union, so there are things that could come up in that conversation, in that speech that could change what we're going to talk about here today. But as long as we have this moment, I think that there's some things that we can look at from a number of different perspectives that are going on in the world surrounding security concerns. First off, let's talk about the situation as it regards Iran. There is a Thursday meeting scheduled for additional talks. But there seems to be increasing frustration on the part of the Trump administration about what they're hearing from the Iranians, that they are genuinely surprised. That's been kind of the indication from some of the negotiators that there hasn't been more movement. And you obviously have these military assets that are in the region that are looking right over their shoulders and prepared to do whatever it is the Americans want to do or support potentially what the Israelis want to do in any situation there. Where do things stand as we go into these Thursday talks, and what do you expect to come out of them, if anything at all?
Well, Ben, it's always great to join you. It appears we're heading towards conflict. Right now, there's been a lot of focus on the U.S. Navy warships that are in theater, but let's talk about the air power. Right now, Ben, there's about 3 times more air power in the Middle East or Europe than we saw for Midnight Hammer. Let's just look at aerial refueling tankers alone. There's about 100 in the region. That's double what the U.S. military used for Midnight Hammer. So it's a very large package assembled. And we do have talks scheduled for Thursday. We heard that from both the U.S., the Iranian side, and Oman, who's brokering these indirect talks. I think one thing that would help would be to get both of them actually in the room. It's almost silly. It seems that they're passing envelopes back and forth in different rooms, even though they're both in the same city in Geneva, where these talks are going to resume. But the buildup is big. One of the things I'm focused on are where are the F-22s, the 5th generation stealth fighter jets, the Raptors. They're still in the UK right now. And if you remember, before Midnight Hammer, they showed up in the Middle East just 4 days before the B-2 strike. And they were the first ones over the beach to take out air defense systems.
That buildup has been characterized by sea and air power. It does seem to me telling that given the fact that the president had his own political career elevated so significantly because of his critique of boots on the ground wars in the Middle East, that this seems to be another situation where the president doesn't really want to have real boots on the ground, that he wants to be able to do this, essentially running a potentially a Gulf War style script, but without the presence of the army and things along those lines. Is that something that you're hearing in terms of the discussion around this buildup?
Totally, Ben. And just look at the assets. A lot of people are comparing the buildup right now to the Iraq War in 2003. I don't like that comparison. That's why I start off talking about Midnight Hammer. There are no U.S. Army divisions deployed. There's no U.S. Marine divisions deployed in theater right now. This is not going to be any kind of invasion. You can't rule out special operations forces. But we've heard from the president and we've heard from officials talking about what he's considering. Like all Pentagon options, they come in 3 sizes, just like, going to the store. There's a small, medium, and large package. And if the president wants to do something on the lower scale, perhaps a Tomahawk strike. There's certainly a number of guided missile destroyers fully kitted out with Tomahawks. And let's not forget the guided missile submarine USS Georgia, which launched 30 cruise missiles at Isfahan. That was the 3rd nuclear site. Didn't get as much attention as the B-2s, probably because the Pentagon never confirmed Georgia was used. That's a guided missile submarine, can carry 154 Tomahawk cruise missiles. Those are the old Ohio-class boats. I realize I'm getting a little in the weeds on the military stuff, but that's probably why you had me on, hopefully. But there are significant assets in the region, not just strike aircraft, F-35s, F-16s. The big thing, again, I'm looking at is the F-22s. Where are those? Unfortunately, they break down a lot. The mission capability on those is just 50, 60%. It's older aircraft. Might be the only knock on Bob Gates is he capped him at 187 airframes. At the time, he thought, well, we know the war is going to be in the Middle East. And certainly looking back, I think a lot of Pentagon planners, probably the president himself, wishes he had more of them.
Mm-hmm. You talk about plans. There's been plans regarding Iran, obviously, during different administrations and how to deal with it in this circumstance. Should there be an opportunity if the regime is weakened? What would going in look like? There's got to be all manner of different approaches that have been considered over the years and under different leadership. Is this a situation where the president is dusting off an old plan and assigning new tech and new equipment to it, or is this a different approach, one that is in whole has a lot more in common with, as you say, Midnight Hammer and things that we haven't really seen the United States traditionally do in terms of its confrontations in the Middle East?
There's no question, just like football, which we both enjoy, you got to dust off those plans depending on personnel, assets in the region. I mean, the U.S. Air Force is about half the size it was in 1987. So you're dealing with a smaller force, but certainly we can look at different conflicts. I mean, let's not forget that in the beginning of President Trump's return to office, he bombed the Houthis in Yemen for 50 days. Got a little impatient with that. But there's, reporting now about the Houthis firing surface-to-air missiles, a couple close calls with some of those F-16s flying the Wild Weasel missions. In fact, Silver Stars awarded to the pilots just to show you, they don't hand those out, as you know, no participation trophies with that medal. And that's the Houthis. So you figure even since Midnight Hammer, Chinese, the Russians have been assisting Iran in building back up. There are reports of hundreds of shoulder-fired missiles that have been almost their version of the Stingers that have been put into theater. Some of this equipment is older. Let's not forget that drone, the Global Hawk that was shot down over the Persian Gulf in 2019. It's when people thought President Trump was going to strike in the immediate aftermath. He ended up calling it back. Then again, he ended up droning Qasem Soleimani 7 months later. So between Soleimani, in killing him in Baghdad, and Midnight Hammer, we've seen the president use force against Iran. This plan that is being floated around, and again, the president probably hasn't even made the decision yet. It comes in different varieties. It's all based on what they're seeing from the Iranians, and that's there's a reason. Benjamin Netanyahu came to Mar-a-Lago around New Year's. He was the only foreign leader celebrating the new year, ringing it in at Mar-a-Lago. He was warning President Trump about Iran reconstituting its ballistic missile threat. A lot of those ballistic missiles were taken out by the Israelis, but they are building. We've seen some activity at some of the nuclear facilities that were bombed during Midnight Hammer. And pretty much going back to the negotiations, this all comes down to will the Iranians want to pledge to give up their nuclear program? They're shown no sign. And we even heard from Witkoff, and nobody would call a hawk, saying this is about capitulation or giving up your nuclear program. And really a lot is going to depend on what is on this paper, this proposal that the Iranians owe the U.S. side. And not to quote The Godfather, but really at the end of the day, it's about their signature brains on that contract, Ben.
Mm-hmm. I think that there is definitely a political risk inherent in the president making any type of decision to go forward with this. At the same time, doesn't it seem to you that there's been so much invested in this and so much material deployed, so many resources deployed, that it's really not a question of if but when? That there's no longer really a question that we're going back to just the way things were in terms of our treatment of the regime, without major concessions that seem impossible to achieve and unlikely to happen, even at the point of all of the different resources that we have pointed at them right now.
There's no question we're coming up on the 4-year anniversary of Russia launching its full-scale invasion of Ukraine. Did they call their forces back? No, we saw it before Maduro. That was about a 4-month buildup in the Caribbean. Before that operation was launched to snatch Nicolas Maduro and his wife from their bed using the Delta Force. We saw it for Midnight Hammer. There was a tremendous buildup in the region. You had the refueling tankers deployed to Europe. In fact, 15 of those tankers, as we speak, are sitting in the Azores. And those tankers were used to refuel the B-2s en route to the target and back from Midnight Hammer. So the chessboard, the pieces are on the board. The team is set. It would be almost surprising if they weren't used in some way. Because as you mentioned, recalling those forces after the president said locked and loaded, help is on the way. We heard Lindsey Graham on a stage in Munich, not far from the security conference, in front of 250,000 people saying help is on the way, for crying out loud. So there are a lot of people talking to the president that want this. You mentioned, though, the political risks. There's certainly going to be people cautioning against starting what some people say would be a war. People are kind of dancing around the word, around the word war, using euphemisms, conflict, kinetic strikes, not my personal favorite. If we launch large-scale military operations, large strikes against Iran, that's going to war. The Iranians will shoot back, and it'll unleash Shia fundamentalism, especially if the Ayatollah is killed.
Yeah, I think that playing games with it, those terms is something that you can do when it comes to the exfiltration of someone like Maduro. Were we at war with Venezuela? It's not going to be the same if you are bombing the crap out of them in Iran. I want to shift to a conversation about what's going on currently in Mexico. We saw the killing of El Mencho. It's reported that it was done by the Mexican military. I will add a caveat that I have predicted on this program before, that is the way that you would see reports come out of the deaths of various leaders in the cartel narco circuit, that it would always be done with the cooperation, the friendly cooperation of our Mexican allies who only want to get rid of those narco regimes. That set off a series of explosions, of violence, of setting cars and buildings on fire, all through Puerto Vallarta and a number of other tourist spots that are very popular with, of course, Americans and Europeans and the like.
Sorry you had to cancel your vacation, Ben.
Yeah, I wouldn't go there. I wouldn't recommend it. The thing that comes out of this, though, is where does it go from here? Is this a momentary burst of cartel violence and activity in response to what they view probably as being betrayed by the Sheinbaum government? Or is this something that could be more sustained, could lead to potentially risks in the sustaining of that government, just given the difference between the way that the cartels are being treated and have been treated under AMLO and now under Sheinbaum?
Forget President Trump has put a lot of pressure on Claudia Sheinbaum, and back when President Biden was in office, the millions of illegal aliens that came to our country did so by the help of these cartels. We heard the term coyote. Remember Bill Malushin's reporting on the border. They were facilitating this. And that's why when President Trump came back to office, first thing he wanted to do was shut down that border, and he had the cartels in mind. We also know, as we're seeing these drug boats get droned seemingly every day, the president, he doesn't like drugs. He doesn't like illegal drugs. He doesn't want, now you could argue the demand is still there in our country, but he wants to see Claudia Sheinbaum do more against the drug traffickers. And depending how much the U.S. was involved in this operation, whether it's just intelligence or perhaps some snake eaters on the ground, the loss of El Mencho is big. And it does appear it's kicked off a turf war. That's what I saw with the gun battles yesterday in the streets, were, just unleashing chaos. Because when the boss isn't around, a lot of people are clearly stepping up and making calls. But certainly a very tough time for Americans in Mexico. A lot of people are in Puerto Vallarta. We saw some of the videos on X. It's horrible. But in terms of how long lasting, this is probably more of a dust up that we should see settle down in a few days.
Mm-hmm. I think that the real question going forward is if this is a demonstration of the Sheinbaum administration essentially getting the message. That the message sent by everything that we were doing in Venezuela, that the Trump administration was doing when it came to those droning of drug boats, was a message that was not just for Venezuela, but was for Mexico as well, to say essentially, get your house in order or we will do it for you. Right. Whether that's something that happened in this instance, I think people can, make their own, come to their own conclusions. But it certainly is a different posture than the Mexican government and military has had toward the narco side in a long time. Remember, Just last year, Sheinbaum was saying that she didn't want to go to war with the narco because that would violate their human rights.
Human rights.
So that's this. There's been
human rights violated.
Yes, there's been a significant difference, a significant shift in terms of our neighbor to the south. Now I want to talk to you about the situation in Europe for a moment. We saw the situation play out in Munich, the reaction to Secretary Rubio's speech, but then also the coverage surrounding the diplomats afterwards. They may have stood and applauded him out of respect or out of agreement or out of relief, perhaps, to the message that he had to say. But coming out of it, there were a lot of people who gave off the record quotes and a couple of them on the record that basically said, we don't feel like anything's really changed. We still feel disrespected. We're not going to forget the Greenland thing for a long time. We also think that this is an administration that is one that we can't really trust. And so we're all going to, the implication of all of that is we've got to shift to have a closer relationship with China, which is certainly what the Canadians, have been doing. Tell me what you think coming out of that Munich meeting are the headlines about our relationships as it currently stands with Europe. And when these NATO folks come forward and say, oh no, we're strong, the relationship is strong, are they just trying to manifest that?
Probably. The speech was very well received. People didn't have to get out of their seats and giving a standing ovation, which is what Rubio received. And I think he tapped into something that most Europeans believe to be true, and that is you cannot let Western civilization decline. We've seen it in our schools in the United States or in colleges. You go back to 1960, Western Civ was a required course for everyone. Today at our elite schools, only 20% of them offered as an elective. And what Secretary Rubio, I thought, tapped into was the United States is a child of Europe. We thank them for the explorers. We wouldn't be here without Europe. We are sons of Europe. It was notable when he thanked Spain for giving us horses and cowboys, and some took umbrage with that and said Mexico would like a word. I believe her last name was Cortez, which was also interesting. But
history has its sweet ironies.
Indeed. But I think when you start talking about Western civilization, our roots, and not wanting this to decline, and for NATO stepping up, spending more in its defense, you don't have to go very far back, just post-World War II when Britain had 1,000 ships. Today, they have about 10 that are worthy of combat. And by the way, none of their warships can fire land attack missiles like our destroyers. Yep. And that's a big problem. And, we're here at the 4-year anniversary of Russia's full-scale war on Ukraine, and some people would like to see President Trump and the United States step up and do more. But as you're seeing with this buildup in the Middle East, as you saw with Maduro, as you're watching China rapidly grow its military like no one has this century, the United States is spread pretty thin right now. And certainly as our forces are, but also the threats around the world. So it is incumbent, I think many people believe, for Europe to step up. If the Germans can make those nice BMWs, Mercedes-Benz, they can make some weapons too. And I realized there was a time a few decades ago, nobody was dying for Germany to rebuild their military, but most people would agree that those times have changed, and that Western Europe in particular needs to step up. We've certainly seen our Baltic allies standing up, and in Poland, they're spending, they see the threat, it's on their doorstep, whereas people want to see Western Europe do more. And that's what we heard from Secretary Rubio. We need strong allies was, I believe, his quote. And, the NATO alliance is better off if Europe is stepping up. It can't just be the United States.
Yeah, as the old line goes, when the Russian tanks roll westward, you can't really depend on the light horse of the London School of Economics to defend you. So the thing that is sticking out to me, though, about this is mostly one of attitude. The contrast between Vance and Rubio's attitude toward the Europeans. If you think of Vance as going in there and just being a bull in the china shop versus Rubio, who is operating with a diplomat's touch, the conversation has to happen. It's according to the latest reporting, both from Axios and others, the president openly entertains the idea of who should be on top of the ticket that succeeds him, and polls people the way that he likes to do about what they think. Do you think that speech made a mark for the president in terms of his views of Secretary Rubio? Is it just, or is that just something that is kept in kind of the overall package of what you get comparatively?
I think it sure did, Ben. In fact, you heard from the president himself. He was at the Board of Peace. Now, you can talk about the irony of the president presiding over the Board of Peace recently, and yet this massive buildup in the Middle East. But that aside, the president, it almost sounded like a hint of jealousy when he was talking about how well received the speech was. And the president, probably not a more astute student of the media than President Trump. And he saw the headlines. There's no question he's thinking it. And I think some in the Republican Party are thinking it. It was a very good speech. To contrast it with the vice president a year prior in Munich, you didn't hear Secretary Rubio talking much about free speech, the way Vance went in there just throwing haymakers. Some criticism on both sides. You still didn't hear a lot about Russia, and there were some words and topics people uncovered, but there's no question the diplomat's touch was a nice way to put it, that Secretary Rubio, that speech was widely applauded. We saw it on the pages of the Wall Street Journal, your pages too. People liked the speech, and it was a gentle touch. There were certainly some shots thrown in there from Rubio, talking about trade, talking about tariffs, but people liked the speech, and there's no question the president saw the headlines and even made note of it, how popular it was.
Mm-hmm. I want to talk to you before I let you go about the utter dominance of the Canadians by America in what we consider to be at best our fourth most important sport, and what is a defining sport for Canada at the Olympics. I know that you had to have been watching those both gold medal matches, and they were impressive, I think, in different ways. That final deke in the women's match was the stuff of old Sega Genesis games, and but the outcome at the end of that overtime period for the Americans just seemed to come with this enormous explosion of national pride. When you take an assessment of what the American relationship, such as it is currently, stands at with Canada, is there any reason at this point that they shouldn't be the 51st state?
Maybe just Alberta, but what a game! And unfortunately, I was at work. Or fortunately, however you want to see it, I'm about to go.
Oh no! Oh my gosh! You didn't call out
going
sick?
Over elements. I'm sitting there talking to Peter, talking to the producers, but also watching the game. The goal was scored like seconds before I went on. So, big smile on my face. So obviously it wasn't about the guy jumping the wall at Mar-a-Lago, but it was incredible, by the way. And by the way, shout out to our goaltender on the women's team, Franklin. She is from Chappaqua, New York, my hometown. Yeah. What I love so much about the men's team, though, is the brothers, Hughes. Okay, and they were awesome. And, Jack, Quinn, and by the way, Quinn had the game-winning goal against the Swedes in the quarterfinals just a few days prior. Their mother played on the USA team, father, big hockey coach. Nelson's father played on the 1980 team. How about that? 46 years to the day of Miracle on Ice 1980, we win. It was awesome seeing the reaction nationwide. There's a reason I'm sitting here in front of the flag. It was amazing. It was an incredible win. It was awesome. And I love the timing, 8 a.m. on a Sunday morning on the East Coast. There were some complaints about that, but I thought it was great. It was the sporting event around the world, and everybody was watching, and it was just thrilling.
Yeah,
the Chuck brothers. I mean, we talk about two sets of brothers. I mean, those guys, they're like from Slapshot, right? These guys are wild. It was awesome. So many storylines with this team. And yes, they're all NHLers. Yes, they make millions, but they just looked like such a gritty bunch. And I think a lot of America could relate. And just it was thrilling seeing the scenes from around the country.
Lucas,
and how about the president calling into the locker room too, inviting him to the State of the Union? I mean,
I wonder. I wonder if any of them will be sober enough to show up.
By the way, there's a younger Hughes kid, Luke Hughes, is also on the Devils with Jack. It's amazing how you have 3 NHLers in the family. It's insane, actually.
The Hugh Hewitt is a frequent listener to this podcast, and I talk to him once a week, and he always asks. He asks me questions about hockey because he's less of a hockey guy. To me, this team was so great because it exemplified what is best about hockey in terms of its team nature, the grittiness involved, and the fact that I think that these guys really are representative of that, and not just, as you say, even if they're making millions, they don't seem like it. No. And I think that the other thing to appreciate about this was, the Canadians dominated most of that game. I mean, this is
42 shots.
I have never, on that scale, the degree to which you had a goalie stand on his head and just be the difference maker in that game is insane.
No question.
And but yes, I have to say this was a unique moment. I am not used to hearing at 11 a.m. Freebird blasting out of my local bar, and that is what I heard. The guitar
and the beer, the Miller Lite, firing up a heater. I mean, that guy became a national symbol. Is he being invited to the State of the Union? Anyway, it's just incredible.
Well, I'll let you go with this, Lucas. The Canadians have been looking down their nose quite a bit at the Americans over the past several years, particularly under Trudeau, and they've taken issue with the degree to which America has disrespected, let's say, the borders of its claims. Do you think that now that we've seized literally the thing that is most important to them, not just by the men, but by the women as well, will they give any reconsideration to that? Or do you think this is just going to make things even more interesting the next time that there's some exhibition show off?
Oh, even more so. And I hope they bring back the Four Nations, by the way, not to get too much in the weeds on hockey, but I thought it was awesome. I mean, I'm glad there wasn't a brawl this time, but I mean, by the way, how much was Canada irked when Jack Hughes was the first overall player taken in the draft? I mean, like, American hockey, I saw a post on X from 2011 that said youth hockey's at an all-time high. Look out, 2026 Olympics. Some of those things do age well. Okay, I mean, it was awesome. Well. And I think they certainly won over some fans. There was a lot of people that woke up saying, are there quarters or there halves? Like, how does this sport work? And by the end, we're misty-eyed, Googling Hughes brothers, Kachuk brothers, and that goaltender. I mean, that was like the Golden Dome, between the posts. I mean, that was just incredible. I mean, that save was, it was almost like the Caps, Brendan Hope back in the day in 2018. I mean, didn't see too many people talking about that, but
at least the Canadians have that stuffed stoat to keep to dry.
They always have the Molsons, right?
Lucas Tomlinson is on X at Lucas Fox News. Lucas, thanks so much for taking the time to join the Big Ben Show today.
Always a pleasure, Ben. My son dropped in just at time. He was yelling for me upstairs, and I was like, dude, I don't want one of those BBC moments where he climbs all over the...
no, that's okay. I highly approve. It'd go viral.
All right, Ben, thank you so much.
I am happy to welcome to the Big Ben Show today Fred Fleitz. He is the vice chair of the America First Policy Institute Center for American Security. You can follow him on X at Fred Fleitz. Fred, I want to talk to you, and we are recording this prior to the State of the Union, so there could be some things that are talked about that change situations, but we are anticipating the meeting with the Iranians on Thursday that this administration is going to conduct as things currently stand. And we've seen the buildup. We've seen the military resources and material headed toward the Middle East. We've seen the frustration expressed by a number of different Trump administration officials and negotiators, including Steve Witkoff, about the unwillingness of the Iranians to budge on any of the key questions. Is it inevitable at this point, you believe, that a strike against the Iranians is imminent, whether by the United States itself or with the United States in a supporting role? What likelihood would you put on there not being a strike?
Ben, it's a pleasure to be here. I think the possibility of a strike is very high. And I think this is unfortunate because I believe that President Trump really does want to make a deal with Iran to lower tensions and to address various issues that concern us in terms of security and in terms of their persecution and execution of the Iranian people. But what we're seeing right now is that the Iranians are trying to play the U.S. like it has many times before in multilateral negotiations. That did not work last year. They think now, mistakenly, that if they can offer Trump protracted talks, he'll settle for that and not attack. And I think that's a grave mistake.
Why do you think they're making that mistake? Especially because everything about this administration, particularly this second administration, seems to be far more willing to pull the trigger on things where perhaps in the first administration it was a bit more chaotic. There was less clear who was kind of up and who was down in informing the president on matters national security and foreign policy. This time around, it seems pretty consistent to me. Why don't the Iranians see that?
No, that's a good question. I think Marco Rubio answered that recently when he said that the Iranian leadership is just controlled by this radical theological worldview. They're fanatics. And I think they're prepared to go down in flames. It doesn't matter what we say to them. They're simply not going to budge. And it's sort of silly because realistically, Iran cannot enrich uranium right now. That program has been destroyed. I think they're trying to rebuild it. I believe that's going to take 5 to 10 years. They may have some near weapons grade uranium to fuel 9 to 10 nuclear weapons. I believe that's deep underground buried because of last June, but they're refusing to budge on their right to enrich uranium. The only purpose of that is to make nuclear weapons fuel. And I'm very glad that President Trump has been quite firm about that. There are people in the administration who believe otherwise. They're frankly wrong. And I think the president has to make a real point here. If you want to have a peaceful nuclear program, we'll give you reactor fuel rods, but you're not enriching yourself.
The tea leaves that you see, everyone is paying attention to indications here and there about the escalation involved. And so we're paying attention to where the F-22s are. We're paying attention to potential evacuations. We're paying attention to what Israel is doing in preparation for potentially these types of strikes. What indications are you seeing in terms of the deployment of American resources and material about the type of approach we would take, the U.S. military would take, if the president gives the go-ahead?
I think we should first stipulate that whatever indications we see is probably not what's really going on, because we're not going to do things that the Iranians can see coming. So when we see statements by Israeli officials that they're worried about where President Trump is, I don't think that's true. I think that is what the Israelis want the Iranians to believe. I think that if there's a strike, it'll either be a small demonstration to try to get the Iranians to the negotiating table. I think that will fail. Or an attack to really undermine Iran's military power, to hit the Revolutionary Guard Corps, certain militias that have been used to attack the Iranian people, maybe weapons depots. I also think there's going to be some kind of an effort to get the internet back on. Somehow we have to get more of these Starlink terminals into Iran and to help the Iranian people communicate with each other, because by communicating with each other, they can basically promote protests around the country and find out what other groups are doing.
I'm aware, obviously, that there have been plans made by prior administrations about what to do with Iran, and in different contexts and over the years. I'm curious, given the fact that we have seen some pretty incredible efforts by this administration, this Pentagon. You think of not just Operation Midnight Hammer, but this the process that had to be taken in order to avoid the loss of a single American life in the exfiltration of the Maduros. That's that's Hollywood stuff. You are not used to seeing something like that. How much of the approach right now do you think is doing the kind of things that we've planned ahead, that have been long, held by the officials and the advisors who have been looking at the Iranian problem? How much of it is a new approach or a modified approach based on the fact that President Trump is so averse to the idea of boots on the ground of the Middle East?
Well, it's a good question, especially when we hear Iranian leaders saying that they're going to strike back, that they may try to take out a U.S. aircraft carrier. It's worth remembering that our military war games this constantly. They know what targets they want to hit. They know what the Iranians have. We have weapons and capabilities that the Iranian government does not know about. We use just a small fraction of our military force against Iran last June. So did the Israelis. The Israelis could have kept bombing Iran for several more months. They wanted to. President Trump wanted to end the war, start a ceasefire, stop the killing, and I think that he was right. So I think we can speculate on how the attack may go forward, but I would say that whatever the tea leaves seem to be right now, I think President Trump has something else in mind.
Mm-hmm. I don't know if you've wargamed this yourself, but if you have, or if you just have mentally, what's the approach that you would use or that you would anticipate being used to make that makes the most sense from the American military?
First, I think that these recent demonstrations at universities are extremely important. They see the attack coming. And whatever we do is going to encourage the Iranian people to keep going after this regime. There's no going back for this regime. After they killed tens of thousands earlier this year, there's going to be a long-term insurgency. But I think these attacks, if they're planned strategically, will encourage the Iranian people that they can overthrow this government. There is hope. But we have to have a long-term strategy also, because you may see some people coming on Fox saying that we're going to achieve regime change. We're going to knock the regime out with this attack. We're not. This regime is going to survive the attack. It may be weaker. We may encourage the insurgency, but we need a long-term plan in addition to these attacks to encourage defections, to make it clear that members of this regime that participate in atrocities will be put on trial for war crimes. There should be efforts to block there should be cyber warfare against the Iranian government to make it harder for them to coordinate, to attack protesters. I think the message that you and I should get out, Ben, that there is not an easy solution to this. It's going to be a long struggle. I think these attacks will help, but it is not going to displace the regime.
So what you just said there, which I obviously agree with, is something that I haven't heard from this administration. Now, part of that, I think, is because they've got a lot of things on their plate that they're dealing with. But it's not a message that I think the American people have necessarily received. I believe that they have kind of thought that, as some commentators have said, this is just going to be a regime change attack. And as you and I both know, that's something that is extremely unlikely and is much more a situation where the Iranian people and this existing insurgency is going to have to solve their problems internally themselves. Well, how do you get that message across to the American people, or is it going to be something that they only learn after things start rolling?
I would encourage President Trump to talk about this in the State of the Union address, to explain that we're going to make a difference here, but it's complicated. It's going to be a long, bloody struggle by the Iranian people. We're going to stand with them. And there's other things we could do. There are ethnic minorities across borders of Iran. We could start arming and assisting members of those ethnic groups outside of Iran, so they can help their ethnic brothers within the country. And those groups are already being persecuted because the Iranian government is worried that they could start a massive demonstration to overthrow the government. But I think the message should be conveyed to the American people that this is hard and it's going to take time.
Mm-hmm. You mentioned weaponry and arming various groups. The protesters who've been mowed down by the tens of thousands in the streets, and the estimates, I don't know what your favorite estimate is, but I mean, they're just extraordinary in terms of the high levels. They have not been able to have the type of weaponry or resources that they could use to topple anything. Is there going to be an influx of material, or does this require existing military forces within the nation to effectively switch sides?
I hope we have the Iranian military switching side. I hope we have Iranian military commanders who decide they're going to stop firing on civilians. And I understand they're using certain units from outside of Tehran, and they may be bringing in units from outside of Iran to attack Iranian civilians because they're worried that Iranians will not want to kill Iranians in this situation. But you're asking some questions that go to how we may intervene that I don't have good answers to. I assume that this is being strategized by Israeli and American officials, but it's a difficult challenge. And I think the effort to overthrow this regime, given how well armed it is, how ruthless its security forces are, is going to be very difficult.
One aspect of this that certainly does come into play is our relationships with our allies in Europe, many of whom have had their own relationships with Iran over the years. And of course, Iran can also turn to support from China and from Russia, though that seems to be significantly diminished at this moment. Does Iran have any friends that it can call on? And is the reaction from Europe going to be anything more than just kind of chiding from Macron or something like that about once again pulling off some cowboy stunt?
You know, there was talk during the Biden administration of this new axis of Russia, China, North Korea, and Iran. It seems like that axis isn't that strong, that the Russians and the Chinese are not going out of their way to help the Iranian government. I've heard reports of transport aircraft coming from China and Iran. I'm not sure that that's true. I don't know how much the Chinese and the Russians want to stick their neck outs for the Iranians. And the Europeans are frankly spineless. They would prefer everything to go through the United Nations. They're concerned that negotiations aren't proceeding, even though they know negotiations aren't going to go anywhere. They're sticking with the fraudulent nuclear deal negotiated by Barack Obama, the JCPOA, that we know from intelligence material stolen by Israeli intelligence, the Iranians cheated against extensively. I just think the Europeans in this instance are hopeless. I wish they were with us. But frankly, if we knock out the Iranian regime, they're all going to come around and say, well, we were really with you all along.
Yeah. It's funny the way that works. The president has more things on his plate than Iran, obviously, and we were talking in the aftermath of one of them playing out in front of our eyes on video footage from Puerto Vallarta and from all across Mexico of a dramatic increase in cartel violence and activity following the death of El Mencho, purportedly at the hands of the Mexican military with U.S. support. We'll see what the true story is, potentially, eventually, maybe not. The attitude of the Mexican government last year from President Sheinbaum toward the narcos was to say that they were not going to be doing any kind of crackdowns against them, that they were going to resist the pressure from the Trump administration. Is this a natural follow-on to what went down in Venezuela, of the Mexicans basically learning from that experience that they're going to have to set their own house in order?
It might be, but I think the only good that came out of this is that the Mexican government is actually cracking down against a major cartel and a major cartel leader. And why are they doing that? That's because President Trump has said to Sheinbaum, if you don't do it, the U.S. will. Mexico doesn't want that. Maybe the show of force in Venezuela made a real difference. I'm really concerned about what's going on in Mexico. I haven't been to these resorts in Mexico. I don't know if you have, but the understanding by all these travel agencies is that there's sort of a special case. There's extra strong Mexican security. You don't have to worry about the violence in the rest of Mexico endangering your vacation when you go to these resorts. Well, right now, that's not true. And I just think it's a stunning reversal.
Yeah, I mean the peace is always kept by, you buy off the cartels, they leave all the tourists alone. They want the money to keep flowing in, and it's just it's a handshake kind of agreement that just involves money going back and forth, and money and drugs, and that's something that really has broken here. I wonder how quickly this is going to become a major security issue for the United States, and given the president's overall attitude toward the Western Hemisphere, it seems to me one that he's going to pay a great deal of attention to. I want to talk to you about that overall perspective, one that was voiced by Secretary Rubio in Munich quite eloquently. What do you think of the nature of this second Trump term and the degree to which he wants to bolster American strength closest to home, where he seems to really have the mindset of I want to take care of all family business as it relates to everything that is close and nearby as during this second term?
Well, Trump's America First approach to U.S. national security in the first term was really focused on trying to keep us out of unnecessary wars, use military force occasionally if it was in our interest, but to really try to get us out of conflict similar to what happened after the second Iraq war. This term has been different in a couple of ways. The president is much more willing to use military force to deal with issues he thinks pose a significant threat to U.S. national security. And the best example of that was the attack on Iran. I don't think anyone thought Trump was going to bomb Iran. That was really stunning. But he said, look, I came up with the America First approach to U.S. national security. I decide what's in it. It doesn't matter. Tucker Carlson is opposed to what I'm doing here. We can't let Iran get the nuclear bomb. And I think when Carlson criticized him, he referred to him as kooky, which I thought was sort of amusing. And the same thing in Venezuela, but that reflects a different approach for Trump's national security policy, and that is defending the southern border. I think Trump was horrified at the millions of illegal aliens, including many criminals, who crossed the border because Joe Biden didn't defend it. But Trump is not just defending the border. He is going at the source of the instability that caused all these migrants and criminals to come into the country. To do that, he's trying to reassert American leadership and dominance in the Western Hemisphere. And that was sort of surprised everyone who looked at his first national security strategy to see the real focus on the Western Hemisphere, which we did not see in the first term.
Mm-hmm. There is a real desire, I believe, to try to redefine what America First means in the going forward, meaning that coming out of this Trump term, there are a lot of different people who want to own the definition and set the parameters by which it is judged. You mentioned one of them. I think that can be a long list of people who are going to try to do that. What is your general impression of how much of that is real and how much of it is simply, internal political squabbling over control? Who's up and who's down, who actually has the power here? Or do you think that there really is a significant faction, as some people, try to represent, of the president's own support, which has significant misgivings about his foreign policy? Personally, I don't hear that. I don't hear that from the people I know who are his diehard supporters. But I wonder if you hear differently.
I think there's a small group of outliers who would like to see the president's America First policy go in another direction. Some of them are anti-Israel. Some of them, I think, border on anti-Semitic. But it's pretty clear that America First means standing with Israel and standing against anti-Semitism. That's why Netanyahu has called Trump the best friend Israel ever had. I think Trump's support of Israel, his support of Israeli security, recognizing the Iranian nuclear bomb and as an existential threat to Israel and a serious threat to the U.S. is a very important part of his approach to national security. You and I know outliers who think differently. Frankly, if you're with President Trump, that means you're standing with Israel, because that is part of the America First approach to U.S. national security.
One other aspect of this America First policy has been from day one in that first term, but continued today, to call out our allies around the world to start paying their fair share, to do their part. And that's, everywhere, to stand up and have the kind of military commitment that they have not in essentially since the end of the Cold War. That was reiterated by Secretary Rubio, but it's been reiterated multiple times by this administration. How much do you judge the success of what that messaging has achieved thus far, just given how far a lot of these places still have to go in terms of meeting the demand of the current moment when it comes to the military resources and material they have?
Well, it's been tough love, and it's clearly a message the Europeans didn't want to hear. Out of control mass migration is destroying Europe. It's a threat to our country. It's an enormous threat to Europe. And I don't think many of these European nations can be saved. They've let in so many illegal migrants. I don't know what's going to happen, but President Trump isn't going to let that happen to our country. When we talk about that to our European friends, it's because we care about Europe. It's because that's President Trump's vision. That's what Marco Rubio tried to make clear. And I think there's been a lot of success in Trump's approach towards our allies in Europe. Europe is now paying 5% of their GDP towards defense under their commitments to NATO. We wouldn't have seen anything like that happening in the first term. And I think that goes to Trump's leadership and the fact that he simply has not given up in pressing our allies to pay their fair share. Rubio made the point that we're not pulling out of Europe. We're not anti-Europe. Trump doesn't hate NATO. But NATO has to be reimagined. The U.S. needs some flexibility to move some forces to other areas of the world, to the Western Hemisphere, to the Indo-Pacific, because we have other security concerns to deal with. But when we hear pundits and European leaders saying that this is the end of history, it's the end of America's relationship with Europe, that's obviously not true. And I think Rubio made that crystal clear in his Munich speech.
The other headlines coming out of Munich came from one Representative Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez. Those were headlines of two kinds. Most of the attention was toward her flubs and her inability to answer some pretty obvious questions that she got when she was over there, particularly given that she had staffed up. They had put out reports ahead of her going that this was going to be kind of her rollout as a foreign policy, national security person within the Democratic coalition. She stands at, depending on which poll you look at roughly third in terms of the likelihood of becoming the next nominee for president from the Democratic Party after Gavin Newsom and Kamala Harris. I'm curious about your thoughts on this. We've done the flubs to death. When she wasn't flubbing, when she was reciting her lines, it was interesting how positive, at least from my perspective, the response was from the Europeans. She said the thing about the wealth tax, and the interlocutor that she had there, just said amazing. She invoked the rules-based global order. Talked about Trump as a chaos agent for not bringing the Europeans along when it came to what he did in Venezuela. When you listen to AOC, do you think you're listening to the next foreign policy of the Democratic Party, just given how poorly defined it seems to be at the moment?
Sadly, I think that we probably are. And it reminds me of the victory tour that Barack Obama took through Europe when thousands and thousands of people came out to see him. They were so happy he was elected because he reflected their globalist left-wing politics. Europe is further to the left than we are. And I think that's a reality. I believe there are forces in Europe to fix that because their economic and immigration and energy policy is destroying the continent. And I'm hoping that President Trump will encourage conservative groups to throw these governments out. But I mean, it's not an accident that these Democrats were so well received in Munich, because this is the kind of foreign policy that the European elite would like America to have.
Mm-hmm. And it's one that I think many Americans would reject, but many Europeans would applaud. How potent do you think that will be and I realize we're talking the far distant future of 2028, but it's very short times between elections in Washington. How receptive do you think the American people will be to what is kind of a throwback to Obamaism with a little more social leftism message in response to President Trump's America First agenda? Do you expect that this is going to become something where he takes too many risks, he rolls the dice too many times, there are too many audacious things that he attempts, that eventually one of them is going to not go the way that he wants, and the American people are going to turn on him?
I think you and I know that the American people usually don't vote on foreign policy unless there's a war we're involved in. Probably if the president has a good record in foreign policy, it simply is not going to matter. The American people are going to look at the economy, and they're going to look at security at home. And I think if the president and his successor can make a good case that he's fixed the economy, he's fixed energy, he's made America safer, that his successor is going to win the election. The Democrats are going to try to make a case that he didn't do any of these things. The economy is clearly much stronger right now. I know my 401k is much better than it was under Biden. And I think the trick is that we have to have Republican presidential candidates to strongly make that case.
Mm-hmm. Fred Fleitz is on X at Fred Fleitz. That's FLEITZ. He's the vice chair of America First Policy Institute's Center for American Security. Fred, thanks so much for taking the time to join the Big Ben Show today.
Good to be here. Thanks, Ben.
A little bit of housekeeping today on the grab bag. I wanted to let you all know that I'm starting a new gig, and that's something that is going to be not making a difference so much when it comes to this show or anything that I do with Fox, where I'm happy to be a contributor, and we've had such success with this show thanks to all of your support. I am going to be joining the Daily Wire as its new head of opinion, editing their opinion section, which is not something that they have previously had. I had really, looked forward to continuing the work that I've been doing for The Spectator over the past several years, but this opportunity is one that is just too big for me not to take, and especially given that it comes at a moment when I believe that the conservative movement and Republicans across the country are increasingly disagreeing about certain things that are of the utmost importance. I believe that it's important to have a place where these types of fights can play out, where the debates can take place, where you can have the arguments and come to a resolution, or at least see who has the better of it. We aim to build the best opinion page in America, and that's not something that I take lightly. I think this is an area that has been far too little invested in over the last several years, and we've seen places become pretty stale that need to be lively and interesting and entertaining, but also current, timed to the events that are taking place, and making sure that we are embracing and considering the different opinions that are surrounding us at the moment. This is a very different conservative coalition than it was when I co-founded Red State ages ago, or even when I co-founded the Federalists more recently. This is a very different conservative movement that Donald Trump has helped reshape and reform in ways that are going to play into the decisions that we make in the future, the leaders that we follow and appreciate and elevate. And that's something that I think the American people deserve to see play out in a way that is responsible, that is curated, that is well edited, and that features the best opinions, the smartest minds, and the best people when it comes to the writing that is on offer. So I'll be bringing that to you over at the Daily Wire, but I'll still be here at the Big Ben Show and on Fox News, talking to you and bringing you all the interesting topics and the interesting guests that we have on here every week. And we'll be back next week with more to dive back into the fray.